Traditionally, there is a stigma about mental health. People still have the fear of being seen as weak or sick, especially for the older generations.
It is just the ratios of counselors to students is not actually something that is sustainable. You may have one counselor for hundreds of students, and how are you going to meet the needs of students at that level?
Taiwan is a land of trauma. This trauma is spiritual, this trauma is collective, and we never address that.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Tomasz Koper, sitting in for Divya Gopalan. Access to professional mental health care has improved in recent years, but not everyone benefits from it the same way. And it's not only about the cost and availability. A lot of mental health revolves around people like me, white, middle-class men. And what works for me won't always work for you. That's why experts and practitioners are increasingly calling for decolonizing therapy and counseling and making them work for different communities, each with their unique cultures, ways of thinking, and challenges. And to show us why and how are two professionals at the forefront of this effort. From Taipei, we're joined by Evon Chiu, a bilingual therapist and the founder of Taiwan Multicultural Counseling Association. And from Pennsylvania, we welcome Lois Ridley, a licensed professional counselor who is also working at Wilkes University. Welcome both to the show. Thank you for giving us your time. Evon, I want to start with you. When you talk about decolonizing therapy, what do you mean by that?
Right. We know psychotherapy was originally developed in the West. Currently, the Taiwan training model is mainly based on the US model and the European model, which has significantly contributed to the establishment of the counseling field in Taiwan. However, Taiwan has a very diverse demographic. It has become a very multicultural society in recent years. We have 4 major ethnicities. We also have a lot of Southeast Asian new immigrants as well as expats in Taiwan. And these are all our potential clients or current clients. So let me give an example that the Western concept of therapy is by expressing emotion and getting validated to feel better. This might be a very foreign concept for a lot of Taiwanese clients. And also, Taiwan is a very doing culture. A lot of people, I think it has a root in cross-generational trauma, why people are workaholic in Taiwan. So at the doing culture, people tend to focus on problem solving. They want to fix the problem. So when they come to therapy, they encounter the Western concept of process-oriented, feeling-based talk therapy. They will feel very uncomfortable. And that's why in recent years, we are more aware the needs of different cultural groups.
Well, Lois, the traditional approaches that Evon mentioned, how do they fail, so to speak, the communities that you work with? Do they work for them or not work, just like they don't in Taiwan?
Yes, they definitely don't work because of many of the similar reasons. I mean, people are people, right? And in America, obviously, we have, sometimes you can see some of the differences in the people, in the different ethnicities and the people of color. In particular, it doesn't work primarily because it's very individualistic in design for white middle-class males, where many of the studies were, that's how they can get subjects. And it just doesn't apply when you shift over into collectivistic communities who are very tight, have tight family orientation, and have more informal methods of getting counseling advice and support, which are based on elders, community leaders, spiritual leaders, and such. So it really doesn't work when we pathologize those natural practices that have worked for generations for individuals of color. And particularly in institutions, it doesn't work. The systems actually simultaneously oppress many people of color. And so when you get that mixed together, it just doesn't work.
Well, Evon, when it doesn't work here in Taiwan, what happens then? What are some of the negative outcomes that we're seeing across society because therapy is not there to support cultural needs?
So let me give an example. I used to work with the indigenous students in Eastern Taiwan. And what I noticed is that the curriculum is obviously unsuitable for them. Mm-hmm. And the children and the families, they have been through generations of systematic oppression, resulted in a lot of deep-seated trauma. And as a Han therapist, if I am not culturally sensitive and I am lacking training in addressing collective trauma, I might cause more harm than good to the student.
Well, does that mean that people in Taiwan are less likely to look for help, look for support from a trained professional? Are they more likely to turn to medication instead of therapy? What are you seeing on the ground?
Traditionally there is a stigma about mental health. People still have the fear of being seen as weak or sick, especially for the older generations. It still exists. Although in my private practice, the majority of my clients are between the age of 25 to 35, which means the younger generation are more open to psychotherapy. But, there are still a lot of Taiwanese people are reluctant to go to therapy. It might partially because unresolved cross-generational trauma. So for them, it's difficult for them to verbalize what happened to them, and it's difficult for them to talk about emotions. All these kind of things can be factors preventing them from seeking a coping mechanism they are not used to.
Well, I want to bring in one more element that is probably related to all of this that we're discussing, and is something that highlights why this discussion is crucial for people in Taiwan. The country's suicide rates are some of the highest in the world and well above global average. What's even more alarming is that we are seeing sharp rises in the numbers of young people who choose to end their lives. Women aged 15 to 24 are now over 3 times more likely to die by suicide than they were a decade ago. So, Lois, I do want to explore what's happening in Taiwan, but before we go to that, I want to ask you, is that something that you are also seeing in the U.S. among young people?
It is. It definitely is. It's a similar trend. I mean, I was aware that in Taiwan it was high, and I thank you for bringing that up, because it's a problem everywhere. It's a problem today for the young people. The rates are going up. I was looking at the American Psychological Association. They were just recently reporting how the rates are higher and what we need to do about it. So I definitely agree. The statistic just brings tears to my eyes. I'm just being honest with you. It's just a tough issue.
It is tragic. Well, coming back to Taiwan, the government here is trying to encourage seeking help through programs, some of them aimed at young people. And I know that social acceptance of therapy is improving thanks to a few high-profile TV shows and movies that featured therapy. So, Evon, why are so many girls not getting the help they need in time?
By my experience working with young women, I realized high school age is the most challenging time for a lot of girls. Relational bullying is a very serious matter in high school. And also, besides hormone, they are going through identity formation stage, but different from the previous generations. Nowadays, their role models are from the social media, and there's an emphasis on beauty standard and appearance, which has become a very identity confusing, and it's really not helpful to self-esteem building. And so therefore, school counselors are extremely important. They play a very important role in this. But school counselors are very burnout in the Taiwan system, in the educational system. They're lacking support. They're lacking resources. And they are burnout because the majority of their time have to do administrative work, which can affect their ability working with the students.
Well, Lois, how does that compare to the U.S., especially when it comes to like taboos, burnout, the resources available to young people?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, Evon, because I, previously do have experience working in the school systems with the young people, and that burnout, in fact, led to my own moving on into higher ed because it is so intense. It is just the ratios of counselors to students is not actually something that is sustainable. You may have one counselor for hundreds of students, and how are you going to meet the needs of students at that level? And this is how our system is set up. So it is extremely difficult, and students sometimes, quite frankly, they slip through the cracks, to be honest with you.
Evon, something that you mentioned earlier is the significance of generational trauma and historical trauma. How does that play out in Taiwan among different ethnicities and different social groups? You mentioned indigenous people, but they're not the only ones affected by this, are they?
Right. Taiwan is a land of trauma. Historically, we were a colony, and we went through World War II, which impacted a lot of families. And we had political oppression, and we've been through a lot of social changes. And for example, one ethnicity, the mainlander Taiwanese, in 1949, when they immigrated to Taiwan, what a lot of people forget is they went through the loss of family, they went through death, and they went through violence and war, and they lost their home, they lost everything, and they migrated to Taiwan to start all over. It's a significant trauma, the big trauma they went through, but it was rarely addressed and processed. And a lot of children during the official language policy era, they experienced a lot of shaming and punishment simply speaking their mother tongue. So there was this language repression period that impacted a lot of self-image, self-concept, and identity of these Taiwanese children, mostly my parents' generation. Besides these people, of course, indigenous people, they suffer from the loss of their land, lifestyle, and also dignity. So this trauma is spiritual, this trauma is collective, and we never address that.
Well, Lois, how does that compare to the experience of African American and other BIPOC communities in the U.S.?
Yeah, in the United States, we have multiple generations of trauma. As we know, and as many know, in the United States, there is a history of chattel slavery. And so for Blacks in particular, or African Americans, if you will, we have over 4 generations of trauma right? That has not been yet processed. And then if you look at the indigenous individuals, populations, their generational trauma goes even further back. And it is just something that is interesting because now we have this movement to actually deal with our trauma and talk about it. And so that's why we see this social media culture. I call it this TikTok, Instagram psychology. So the young people are now starting to, I'm just applaud the young people every chance that I get because they're actually embracing it. Is it kind of trying to find a balance now? Yes, of course. When there's a change, always there's a need for it. But there are generations of trauma here that impact our everyday life. For instance, in a school, like I've worked in schools, and in a school, you may have a young person who is a Black male who is, maybe he is sad. And he'll be sent to me just because he was sad one day and they're perceiving it as anger. And he doesn't know why he's angry, but it's because of so many things that have happened to not only him and his family in the past. And his parents, his mom may say, hey, you need to act right before they lock you up. And it's a very real concern that he might have. And this happened often when I was working in schools, and to this day when I work in colleges and in private practice.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people who don't have that generational trauma don't really understand what kind of effects it might have on an individual. So you mentioned anger, you mentioned sadness, but the list doesn't end there, does it?
No, I'm so glad you said that because I have given talks sometimes and I'm listing, there's Janice Fisher does this trauma burst. I'm looking down because the book, I always use it for counseling. And it might be something as simple as I can't sleep, flashbacks, reoccurring thoughts. They're not going to say flashbacks. They're going to say, my mind is just always going and I just can't shut it up. I just feel so anxious. I'm always pacing. I have explosive episodes every 6 months or so because it's built in and they know they're not supposed to. And then poof, something minor happens. And then all of a sudden it's coming out.
Well, Evon, I saw that you wanted to jump in there.
I think it's totally relatable. We have very similar situations in Taiwan. For example, boys were not allowed to cry before, and the expectation on men, and what's being overlooked is male mental health. Anger was allowed for men, but sadness and fear were not allowed here. I think that's a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Evon, I want to stay with you and sort of ask about how the system here is organized. We have the National Health Insurance, which is an outstanding, sort of globally outstanding healthcare system, but it does not cover therapy, or in most cases it doesn't. So how does that play into the whole situation?
Right. It doesn't cover therapy, although we hope it can cover therapy, that more people can get help. Unfortunately, it's not. And in fact, in many countries, national insurance don't cover therapy, not just Taiwan. I think the high scale of funding is the biggest reason. Therapy is high cost and usually takes more than one visit. It's a process. It's a long process. So as you can imagine, it's a huge funding they need. So if therapy is covered by national health insurance, we need to consider other potential obstacles and discuss that before we put into practice. For example, the quality might drop because now the practitioners might have to work longer hours. Now more people are coming in. Do we have enough staffing? Do we have enough training to cope with the diverse population. And now what's happening again is between the age of 18 to 45, they can get 3 sessions of free therapy, which is very good because a lot of high-risk population, they can get the resources and referral they need. So we are saving a lot of lives. But at the same time, we need to consider how the therapy is a process. So how many things can be done in just 3 sessions? And after 3 sessions, what happened to them? Can they continue to get the support? And also, people who come to the 3 sessions usually don't stay. They need to do some statistic on that. But from what I know, most people don't continue. And we need to dig deeper into that why they don't stay. The effectiveness, are they really feeling it, getting the help? So I think ultimately, if people can afford therapy, I think it's okay to encourage them to pay out of pocket. What we need to fund is, the underprivileged population, they really, really need help, and there's no way they can afford it. And what's more doable is like the U.S. system, through work, through employment. They get the work insurance to cover their therapy. I think that it is more realistic for Taiwan.
I do want to raise 2 points that are very much related. Training of future therapists and counselors, and the future of therapy and counseling in both Taiwan and the United States. So let's start with Evon. Are we training enough therapists, enough counselors, enough mental health professionals? And are they receiving the right training right now in Taiwan?
Well, currently we have about 8,000 psychotherapists in Taiwan. It really depends how you look at it. It's enough or not. If every person in Taiwan who needs therapy wants to have a therapist, of course, is not enough. But the current job market situation is there are very limited job openings for therapists. Most of them work at colleges and private practice community mental health counseling centers. It has become very competitive for interns to get a placement. So we don't have enough job openings to place all these licensed counselors. And in terms of training, to cope with the current diverse population, we do need more culturally attuned training programs. However, unfortunately, in our graduate system right now, no schools are providing decolonization training, and very, very few have multicultural counseling training. Unlike the U.S., it's required by the school. I think ultimately what we need is curriculum transformation in the training program, in graduate school programs. Ultimately, that's what Taiwan needs, a paradigm shift.
Well, Lois, what about curricula? What about placements? What about job opportunities for people who want to become counselors and therapists and help others in the United States?
I mean, there needs to be a curriculum change. There needs to be schools, a change even within the schools. I work as a licensed professional counselor. However, if you are in the field of psychiatry, or if you're maybe trained up as a social worker, there have different governing bodies. So the rules are different for training. So whereas I have to take multicultural counseling, and but it's one course, but some of the other ways that you could become a professional counselor, they do not. So it is very uneven. And even when I, within my research and I'm interacting with individuals to collect data, they're saying a lot of it is very surface level. Even the professional development opportunities are very surface level, like quiz, watch video, click, check, and not very experiential and assisting a person. Because let's be honest, therapists very often they care. That's why they're doing it. and they just want the skills, but what's being offered is usually more demotivating from what I'm hearing and the data that I'm looking at than it is motivating.
We are almost out of time, but I do want to end on a brighter note. What's one thing in your field that is giving you hope for 2025 and beyond and for the future? Evon, let's start with you.
I would say young people. The students and interns that I encounter, they really get it. This multicultural society we're facing, they know it's the future skills that we need, and they are so eager to learn about this. They are willing to learn, and they do have cultural humility built in them. So working with the young people really brings me hope.
And Lois?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'm going to add some organizations like we, both counselors with AEDP, where there are some organizations that are actually trying, and they're working to listen and elevate leaders who look like us, leaders who are BIPOC, who can speak into that training space, into that space of developing new curriculum, so that we can redesign things to make it more accessible, not just for the clients, but for the therapists who desire to do a better job to serve their clientele.
Well, thank you very much for that hopeful ending and this very, very important discussion. Evon Chiu, bilingual therapist and the founder of Taiwan Multicultural Counseling Association, joining us from Taipei, and from Pennsylvania, Lois Ridley, a licensed professional counselor, also working with Wilkes University. Thank you both. And for our viewers everywhere, it's been good to have your company. If you've enjoyed today's episode or have anything you would like to add to the dialogue, join the conversation on our social media. And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.